Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all to this very, very important and perhaps most exciting session of the 42nd St. Gallen Symposium, which is the Wings of Excellence Awards ceremony. Why is this so exciting and why is it so important? Because we will hear leaders of the future talking about their ideas for the future today. And the topic of the symposium this year is facing risk. And we have three very eye-opening essays on this particular topic. And perhaps I found a quote from an American poet, Robert Frost, who most of you would know, which I think captures very nicely what these essays are all about. He said that two roads diverged in the woods. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. You will see that the essays we are going to present and discuss, they are truly, in their own respect, very unique. And that's also, I believe, the reason why they actually made it all the way through to this important and esteemed award ceremony. For the competition, we asked for people to submit essays on three different clusters of questions. The first one was detecting risk. What is the role of scenario planning and forecasting methods in detecting risk? Who is or should be responsible for these aspects in the organization? And how should the detection of risk be addressed in an increasingly complex world? The second cluster of questions dealt with risk aversion. Given the increasing trend of risk aversion in wealthy societies, what are the long-term consequences for the economy and society? The third cluster dealt with emerging risks. What are the societal, economic, and/or political risks your generation of decision makers will be facing in the future? And how could you convert these risks into opportunities? And the last and fourth question, or a cluster of questions, was managing risk. Who should bear the consequences of bad risk-taking and why? And how can healthy risk-taking be encouraged in society? We achieved an incredible amount of essays, or number of essays, to this particular competition. As usual, the number of submitted essays were several hundreds. And interestingly enough, it was up 14% compared to 2011. The essays were submitted by authors in 56 countries compared to 48 countries in 2011. The authors came from 261 universities compared to 252 universities in 2011. 83 nationalities were represented compared to 80 nationalities in 2011. And the composition, male and female, didn't really change that much throughout the 2 years. Still, we had a 60% male population of submissions and a 40% female group of submissions. Yeah, I'm coming back to so needless to say, if you know a little bit about statistics, you know that the likelihood of them making it this far is actually very small. But you will understand very, very quickly why they made it this far. Interestingly enough, we had huge interest from China and Japan, and a lot of the essays from Japan dealt with Fukushima, as one could expect. Most focus was on the topic of emerging risk. Actually, 43% of all essays dealt with that particular topic, with the second up was managing risk with 28%. In this session, we will hear the three essay winners present their essays. And as always, we start with the third prize. The third prize in this year's competition goes to Karen Rodriguez. She's an Indian national. She's a doctoral student in management at the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. She holds the postgraduate certificate in management from St. Joseph's College of Business Administration in Bangalore from 2008. She has a Bachelor of Engineering from Vishwavaraya University of Technology in 2006, and she has done several academic presentations in the US and elsewhere. She was elected head girl in high school, and that says a lot. Large high school, and being elected head girl, you have to have good characteristics. And she also won a very prestigious award for a project for the Indian defense on the Indian defense industry. And her current work also involves a lot of volunteering at the local parish. Her essay is entitled "Can't Trust Anyone: Risk Aversion Amongst India's Poor." And on this essay, the jury noted that it is a very urgent topic of risk aversion in emerging economies, presented in an interesting and a very, very novel way. The essay was extremely well written, and the argument, if you listen to this essay, the argument on risk aversion is highly counterintuitive. It wouldn't be what you normally expect if you know something about economic theory, for example. Karen is going to show us an entirely different viewpoint on risk aversion. And we also believe in the jury that this way of thinking about risk aversion could, for example, have some interesting impact on the insurance industry. With those words, please let me welcome Karen Rodriguez on stage to present her essay.
In 2010, when I was collecting data for a paper that I co-authored, the data suggested that poor construction workers in Bangalore city were unwilling to pay even 7 days of their wages towards medical insurance. This was even though the workers knew that they would not be able to afford their hospital bills even if they got a minor fracture, something very common in construction. In fact, the poor in India rarely invest in any scheme that guarantees their long-term welfare and security. And here's the surprising part, not even when they can afford to do so. The poor are risk-averse and hesitant towards investing in health insurance, accident insurance, government-backed income schemes, collectively owned infrastructure, and even education. One of the themes in this symposium deals with the negative consequences of risk aversion in wealthy societies, but I believe that societal stagnation as a result of risk aversion is most pronounced not in rich countries, but in poor ones like India. So in my essay, I asked, why are India's poor so risk-averse towards protecting themselves even when they have the means to do so? My essay primarily encompassed my reflections on my personal interactions with my poor friends in the slum near my house. Through their stories, I argue that in a paradoxical way, the poor become risk-averse towards investing in their own long-term welfare and security because they are deeply suspicious that these long-term security schemes are a means to swindle them. But why? Day in and day out, the poor are constantly diagnosing the people they come in contact with, fully knowing that in almost all these interactions, they are going to be cheated. Years of continually being swindled or even held ransom to bribes and needless red tape have scarred the poor deeply. The poor have lost trust in the processes of the country and have lost trust in other people. The root reason why the poor can't trust is the excessive bureaucracy and the complex documentation needed to get anything done. I know a 62-year-old lady who is a daily wage laborer. I refer to her here as Ravanamma in order to protect her privacy. Ravanamma wished to invest in the government's old age pension scheme. Now, spaces like these are ripe for middlemen who are either employees in these welfare offices or who function informally as agents, and these middlemen take bribes to help the poor maneuver through the system. In Ravanamma's case, various middlemen asked her for 500 rupees at each stage of the process to prove, ironically, that she was poor enough to be eligible for these pension schemes. Still, Ravanamma kept bribing till she had paid almost 6 months of what would be her old age pension and then gave up. Sadly, this is a story I hear repeatedly from poor people. Non-governmental, non-profit organizations or NGOs were conceived as a means to overcome this problem of corrupt middlemen. Working on grants from the government and other sources, these NGOs were supposed to form the liaison between the poor and the welfare services. As of 2009, the Government of India estimated that there were 3.3 million NGOs in India. Unfortunately, the corrupt in India seem to have discovered that NGOs are a lucrative way to get grants and make money illegitimately. To put just one set of figures before you, in 2006-2007, a government report estimated that out of $2.15 billion received in foreign aid by Indian NGOs, 32% was claimed to be used for mere organization expenses. In the same financial year, Hindustan Unilever Limited, India's largest FMCG company that serves 2 out of every 3 Indians, spent just 8% of its total income on administrative and employee expenses, clearly indicating that embezzlement is taking place in numerous Indian NGOs. Corrupt politicians, industrialists, and their families have also discovered that NGOs are a convenient place to launder their illegally earned money. Also, I frequently see NGO employees in the slum near my house, but my friends in the slum say that these employees merely collect some data and statistics and do not help them gain access to any welfare schemes whatsoever. Such data is most probably used by these NGOs to prepare proposals to get government and foreign funds. Once the funds are received, however, the needy are left to fend for themselves. Worse, most of the slum dwellers have faced Tippeswami's situation at least once. Tippeswami is a road sweeper. He actually paid into an accident insurance scheme, but when he met with an accident, he found that the NGO had not completed any documentation, rendering him not eligible for aid. And even when some poor people succeed in gaining legitimate insurance, the process of redeeming claims is all too often swamped with bureaucracy and corruption. Thus, the poor start out with an expectation that even government-funded welfare schemes are out to get them. Their risk aversion towards investing in these schemes is not because they do not know the utility of these schemes, not because they cannot see the benefit to risk ratio. They simply cannot trust that these schemes will give them their rightful share when they require it. If so, not only are they not reimbursed fairly, but the premium or the bribe they pay each year is also wasted. So the poor seem to be risk-averse towards investing in their own long-term security. In reality, it is more risky for the poor to spend on guaranteeing their financial security than not doing so. What happens when the poor become risk-averse towards joining either insurance or income guarantee schemes? In troubled times, in a desperate search for someone they can trust, the poor turn to local moneylenders, usually of their same caste or religious or linguistic group, and borrow money from them at extremely high interest rates. Then they become indebted to these moneylenders, usually for life. Thus, in a warped way, risk aversion seems to be leading the poor towards making even more risky choices. Further, such risk aversion creeps into other areas of their lives in a self-destructive way. The poor are hesitant towards investing in any scheme that may enhance their long-term prospects, including education. Tyagaraja, a poor teenager, tells me that he has dropped out of school because, to him, education takes too long to yield returns, if ever. He says he would rather earn about $1 a day today in order to take care of his sick grandmother and father. At the societal level, when the poor become risk-averse towards paying to any welfare scheme, then the only way to increase societal welfare is through charity. But charitable schemes are rarely self-sustaining or scalable because of the huge numbers of poor people in countries like India. Consequently, hundreds of millions of poor continue to be excluded from healthcare and financial security. And finally, there has been no shortage of social and technological innovations directed towards the poor. Yet, many of these innovations are spearheaded by rich people who are often clueless about the complexities and the non-ideal conditions under which things must operate among the poor. Yet, as a result of no trust and an aversion towards investing in their long-term security, the poor become locked into a spiral of savings and debt. They have absolutely no slack money for entrepreneurial risk-taking, even though solutions for the poor may best come from the poor. When everything is said and through, it comes down to, what can I do? In the early years after Indian independence, when the literacy rate was only 12%, the government desperately launched the Each One, Teach One program. Each Indian who could read and write was encouraged to teach another who could not. It is my belief and my personal experience that a similar approach is the only way by which we can bring the poor into the fold of these welfare schemes. The first step, however, is to talk to the poor. It is so easy to ignore the man sweeping the road in front of your house, or the boy idly striking the cat on the road at a time he should be at school, or the old woman sitting under the tree opposite your house. Yet each of them has a story of frustration to tell, and all they need is someone who can help them maneuver through the bureaucracy. Where governments and NGOs have failed, well-meaning Indians can and have stepped in to make life easier for the poor people that they know, one poor person at a time. All we need to do is listen to and give the poor some of our time. That is what I tried to do. Download the forms they need off the internet, fill it in for them, go with them to the documentation and welfare offices, help them through the processes, show the corrupt that the poor are not alone. I believe this is all it takes to neutralize the poor's risk aversion, that each so-called more fortunate person watches a poor person's back. And such drops of water will increase the mighty ocean of societal welfare. These 2 days of the symposium see the leaders of tomorrow challenging the leaders of today about the problems of our times, and the leaders of today willing and eager to engage with and learn from us. In that sense, the St. Gallen Symposium reflects the best of all our goodwill and sincerity that despite everything still exists in the world today. But while we spend so much time discussing about these macro systems, we might not consider the great disillusionment of the world's poor because their trust is being violated at the grassroots. If so, distrusting all the macro systems that we so carefully put in place for them, millions of poor may voluntarily exclude themselves from healthcare and financial security, and this has personal, political, social, and economic ramifications. So to my mind, the challenge before us all is whether we can carry the idealism of this symposium back to our own spheres of influence and persist at embedding this idealism there. If we can do that, we can collectively ensure that despite continual attempts to dislodge the poor from the centerpiece of the world's social and economic trajectory, the poor remain firmly rooted there. This is our mandate, leaders of today and tomorrow, and I can best express it in the words Prime Minister Nehru used in the first moments when my country was born. The ambition of Gandhi, the greatest man of our generation, was to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but so long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Karen. Excellent speech. This year, the jury had a fantastically difficult task, and that was to choose among two essays for the first and the second prize. And we negotiated for a long time, and as a matter of fact, we could not decide to award a first and second prize, but rather we decided to award two first prizes because both essays are in their own respect very, very unique. The first prize that I would like to, or the first prize holder I would like to present next is Jelena Petrovic. She's a Serbian national, a PhD candidate in the War Studies Department at King's College in London. She holds an MPhil in International Relations from Belgrade University in 2007 and a Master of Arts in International Relations from the same university in 2005. She's a member of the YA NATO working group in 2012, and that's like NATO's young leaders or the leaders of tomorrow, a network among young leaders who help advise NATO on difficult security issues. And she has a very, very impressive list of internships and consultant assignments from organizations such as Trans-Conflict in Serbia, Hague Center for Strategic Studies, Center for Civil-Military Relations in Belgrade, and the UK Defence Academy. In addition to all of these more professional activities, she also is currently in the process of building up a family library, and she is augmenting the knowledge stock, so to speak, of the library with work on international relations and and security issues. So please join me in welcoming Jelena Petrovic to hold her presentation on the essay.
These books that I collect. But thank you, Professor Van Krogh, for this very kind introduction. It is indeed my great pleasure and a privilege to be provided with the unique opportunity to address the people who have the chance to change the course of things and to prevent the emerging risk I will share my views on with you today from becoming a serious threat. I come from the Western Balkans. This is a European region which is deservingly nicknamed the powder keg. It is the one that suffered immense destruction and, more importantly, the loss of lives in the 90s, when everyone hoped, after the end of the Cold War, that we will be entering a more peaceful and a more calm era. So, somewhat surprisingly, what once was the fourth military power of Europe was violently dissoluted in a series of conflicts that contained very strong underlining nationalistic subtext. However, people tend to look at the Western Balkans and say, but that it has been more than a decade since the last fire shot. Is it possible that tensions still exist? We thought that the nationalism has gone with the signing of the peace agreements and with the presence of the international community, which is strong. Aren't you people already on your way of becoming full NATO and EU member states? The truth is that although on the surface we all appear very democratic and very liberal, very tolerant and very loving to our neighbors, there are still very strong and very powerful, coveted sources of nationalism, which it may come as a surprise to you, and which is why I'm here today to tell you it can be found in classrooms, in playgrounds, in libraries, and in nightclubs. So today I'm going to address the issue of youth nationalistic movements in the Western Balkan states. And I'm going to start by sharing with you the information which struck me when I came back first after a long time that I spent in UK. I went back home to Belgrade, and it was the summer, and at the same time there were huge football matches played in Belgrade's football stadiums. But Croatia was also very busy because they were at the time expecting the judgment of the ICTY under Generals Gotovina and Markac for the Operation Oluja. What surprised me that both cities, almost in parallel, suffered from violent outbursts of protests and violent cheering groups, both nationalistically stimulated, but both comprised almost exclusively of people who were far too young to remember, much less to participate in any of the conflicts. Those are people aged 15 to 25, and although some people may claim or may try to search for a reason for such a phenomenon to arise, in the fact that most of the Western Balkan conflicts are only frozen rather than solved, in a rather poor economic performance of most of the Western Balkan countries, I argue that a true source for such a phenomenon should be sought in what I call soft environmental factors of their upbringing, in the chain that wraps this young generation, and that shows very significant weakness in every single link. This chain starts with the family. Some of the parents find it very hard to worry about their teenage offspring's nationalistic outbursts at football matches or at protests or wherever, because they're far too busy working one legal and one at least gray, if not black economy job in order to provide them the necessary food and the clothes on their back. Some of the parents are completely unaware that this matter requires their active engagement, and they rely far too much on educational system to make their offsprings valuable members of the society. And finally, some of the family members are, of course, the source of nationalistic sentiment, as they serve as storytellers, yet they fail to provide the youth with the apparatus of critical thinking. Then the second dysfunctional link is the educational system. It is very interesting to know that, for example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you have as many as 58 buildings, school buildings, where children are completely separated on ethnical basis. They learn from different textbooks, and they do not play together. So they use the same entrance, but from the moment they enter the school, all the interaction between them is completely frozen, non-existent. Similar tendency can be found in northern Serbia, where, for example, in a city called Subotica, with the large Hungarian minority, children going to the same school address each other in English, because the Serbian school children do not speak Hungarian, and the Hungarian children never learn Serbian. So in order to play with each other, they talk to each other in English. History textbooks have very important and very special role in nurturing these young nationalists, as textbook writers usually name other participants of the conflict as almost exclusive wrongdoers, while assigning almost as exclusive the role of victim to the nationality they represent. They're lacking balanced and critical approach, they're politically biased, and they actually do far more harm than good when it comes to educating younger generations of the events of the recent history of the country and the region itself. Last, but then not the least, when it comes to educational system, throughout the region there have been quite a few occasions when teachers themselves have been found guilty of advocating publicly and in front of their students intolerance towards minorities, may they be ethnical or religious minorities or even sexual minorities. Media also play an important role in raising the future of the Balkans. Reality and political shows are bursting with affectations and heated discussions, and they take as much as 80% of the non-commercial time. Non-commercial. They are considered to be non-commercial. Educational program is almost non-existent. Journalists in the Western Balkans, although they all attend programs that are supposed to equip them with necessary skill for objective reporting on events that take place in the region, are still playing the politically sensitive role. They're still balancing, and some of them are even working for the papers that are almost openly advocating certain political discourses. In the end, within the media and the information span of the problem, the extremist organizations have only recently started to be banned in the Western Balkans, and their public presentation are only disputably limited. Most of them are still recruiting young people through social networks and other nowadays popular means of communication. Political elites have not been helpful almost at all. They're adopting very particular historical revisionism, which is based on their daily political needs and consequential separation of what is useful from what is useless to say in public when it comes to the recent history of the region and reconciliation process. There's sometimes, even when they recognize that the problem exists, they're simply diminishing it, and they're ignoring the need to address this emerging nationalism among the youth in an adequate way. So that the fact is that also in the Western Balkans you have far too many right-wings and far right-wings parties always on the verge of winning the elections, that makes those who are willing to recognize the existence of the process passive, because it affects their very sensitive political bargains, and it raises the fear that any unnecessary, or what they think is an unnecessary disturbance of this sensitive balance may damage their chances of winning the seats in the parliament. And last but not the least link in the chain, of course, is the international community. A lot has been written about socialization-based efforts that is rooted basically in this transfer of values. However, if we take the EU as the most powerful external democratization motivator for the countries of the Western Balkans as an example, we will see that only a very small percentage of the Balkans youth actually seeks its identity in Europe. They're rather tying it to their own nationality. Furthermore, even not only the youth, but also their parents, they perceive European Union rather as a big fat wallet, obviously wrongly, than as a source of values. What has been done by the international community? In truth, not much. Well, while they were engaged with the post-conflict reconstruction, they were focused mostly on providing material means, renovating school, donating laptops, and so on and so on. Later on, some support was offered by providing some exceptional young people with the opportunity to travel and to get educated abroad. The problem with this idea was in the fact that exceptional young people, good students, are usually not nationalists. And by the time they enroll university, they're already at least 2 years legally adult, already actively participating in political process by voting. And it may be slightly too late to prevent those nationalistic ideas to root in their young minds. Also, I will have to say that the international community, in all its attempt to address the theme of nationalism in the Balkans, it has been overly focused on presence, neglecting the future. All the programs, all the reconciliation, non-violence communication programs that were created and implemented by the internationals in the regions have been addressing the parents, the generation that has participated in the conflicts. They were obviously wrongly hoped that the parents will transfer it to their children. So what I propose is, I propose that we seek a new solution. And I would like to see it based on 4 principles that I call SEEK: system, education, equality, and coordination. When I say system, I mean we should adopt medium to long-term systemic approach that would provide direct top-to-bottom interaction where the initiative would come from the international community as local ownership, although it's a very catchy phrase, not always possible, especially immediately after the conflict, and especially when it's supposed to tackle the issues which were in the root of the conflict or are significantly impacting the future, the vision of where the country is heading. At the same time, the implementation process should be handled in the field, so it would be better tailored to the needs of the people in the ground, and that way international community would get valuable feedback in order to refine further its approach. When I say education, I mean that the already existing continuous reconciliation, transitional justice, and other educational-based programs should shift their focus from parents to educating the educators and children. And if it's not possible, to provide them with the facts that will be aimed at debunking political myths, nationalist myths, that still exist, then at least it should provide them with the logical apparatus for critical thinking, so they would be able to assess and base their healthy attitudes on after a process of serious consideration of all facts and interpretation they are served on a daily basis. Then there is equality. This has been lacking, especially in the international approach to the Western Balkans. And when I say equality, I mean that this new approach should be applied to all former adversaries. Because leaving one party, former warring party, out actually contributes to the growing sense of injustice, where actually people who are being left out perceive themselves, are fed further their feeling that they have been victims, and their perception of the other warring party as an opportunist is only supported. Finally, there is a cooperation coordination, which has been really poor. International organizations and actors, rather than spending a lot of money on very similar programs, should try better to coordinate with each other and with all the stakeholders in the field in order to avoid redundant programs and the useless spending of man, money, and time. Also, what I would love to see are practical solutions rather than seized foreheads that will say education is the solution or any general phrase. I would like to see that, for example, a joint history book, an attempt of such has been tried and by the Greek Institute, Eliamap, supported by USA, reach more than one front page when it started and actually reach the schools and get into the hand of their target audience. And to conclude, it is my firm belief, and I hope that you will share it, that our duty is not only to help young people to survive by providing them material means to do so, or teaching them, or providing them with skills to earn those material means to survive. It's also about the responsibility to teach them how to live those lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jelena Petrovic, on Growing Up Nationalist. The jury notes about this particular essay that it is an essay with potentially high impact, and it sheds light on a problem which is not much debated in the public. It's written from a very strong background and also personal experience, but it also has a solid academic base and a very clear argumentation. We then come to the first prize, and the last speaker, who's Jennifer Mix, and she's a German national. She's a graduate student in international affairs at the Geneva Institute of International and Development Studies. She holds a bachelor in politics, law, and economics from the University of Erfurt in 2010. She did an exchange semester at Hong Kong Baptist University and has a huge list of very impressive internships at the German Embassy in Buenos Aires, for example, research assistant at the University of Erfurt, Star Publishing, Lufthansa, and so on. And she also is an acting student representative, which I think is very important to mention, especially for an academic audience. On the private side, one of the toughest challenges so far, you said, was actually to do horseback riding all through the Andes Mountains. And that's very, very impressive, actually, for somebody to be able to do that. Her essay is entitled A Three-Step Model to Overcome Negative Implications of brackets, female, brackets, risk aversion in entrepreneurship. And the jury notes about this particular essay that it touches on a very important topic of female entrepreneurship. While we know it's clearly important to do something about it, we always need to be remembered about the fact that most entrepreneurs tend to be men, or very often, at least in the academic scene, we tend to think about entrepreneurs as men rather than females. And it will show us something entirely different, and you also show some problems that we have with the existing logic. It's an excellent build-up of the argument within the presentation, and you have a very good anchoring in the essay of a process model that might have many practical implications, also perhaps beyond entrepreneurship. Jennifer, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor von Krogh, for this very nice introduction. I also wanted to use the chance to thank the organization team. So far, it was exceptional to be here. Well, I was asked in the format of the symposium by Professor von Krogh to mention what has inspired me to choose this specific topic of female risk aversion. And I must admit, I cannot really say, because was it first my family, me being the only girl surrounded by almost same-aged cousins and uncles and always feeling equal until I left to discover the real world? Was it second my teenage readings of Simone de Beauvoir, the biography of Hillary Clinton, and then looking at real-life newspapers and seeing the reality? Was it a workshop by a consultancy I visited about female leadership where I met inspiring, really great women? Don't misunderstand me, but it actually made me rethink stereotyping by these women themselves afterwards. Or was it fourth, last but not least, a very inspiring class I took at the Graduate Institute about gender studies, which was my one and only class I ever took about this topic, with a very diverse group of students and a very good discussions. And I would say it was all mentioned, plus looking around and seeing the ratio of male and female participants in events like this. Everyday situations like this, even though the symposium might not be an everyday situation, made me rethink femaleness. So what does femaleness has to do with risk aversion? Well, regarding future economic and social challenges for each state to sustain its position, strengthening the competitiveness and innovativeness of the system as a whole is crucial. Using the very own human resources in an effective way, as Klaus Schwab pointed out, is essential. Therefore, I will focus the presentation on a significantly high part of society, namely around 50% women. As a specificity, I would like to focus on a field especially connected to risk, entrepreneurship. Well, some of you might wonder what Klaus Schwab actually say. I guess all of you know he's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. And he said that recovery of the recession and innovation will require new, unique ideas. The most important determinant of a country in competitiveness is its human talent. And in many parts of the developed world, women actually account for more than half of the graduates of colleges and universities. Women thus constitute a burgeoning portion of the talent pool available to companies today. This is why I want to introduce a three-step model to overcome negative implications of female risk aversion in entrepreneurship. As introduced in the late 1960s, most people in wealthy societies tend to suppress risk-taking. Plus, in the past decades, we have seen an increase in research about gender differences in behavior. Articles like "Do Women Lack Ambition?" or "Male versus Female Leadership Differences" popped up. In this context, I found a thought-provoking Harvard Business Review article discussing women and the labyrinth of leadership. The article found that women have to cope with prejudices that benefit men and penalize women. It did not specifically mention risk, but I interviewed several managers in different fields, and I found that risk aversion was actually one of the major feminine characteristics mentioned. So taken that women in general are more risk averse, and wealthy societies in general suppress risk, what if we put together those two fields of studies? And how can we overcome negative effects? Well, drawing back to my original topic, I would like to define what an entrepreneur is. According to Schumpeter in 1934, entrepreneurs are people who combine resources in a new way or create new products, markets, or services. Well, I would simply say today, entrepreneurs are risk takers. But how does an entrepreneur look like? An entrepreneur is powerful, dominant, influential, and knows what he wants. An entrepreneur, he is mainly a man, because women are soft, strive for harmony, and try to solve conflicts through communication instead of confrontation. These are quotes I found in academic articles. I didn't make them up. Well, so far, the stereotype. But are women actually more risk-averse than men? From my very own female perspective, I know both risk-averse women and men, either in wealthy Europe, where I am from, and in less wealthy parts of the world, where I used to live for a couple of months. Any long-term prediction is a wild guess, because stereotyping, as the question for this presentation suggests, is wrong. Well, I interviewed a male investment banker from a leading bank, and I found rather outstanding answers. It's not an incorrect statement. They are more risk averse. Women seem less qualified and interested in risky sectors like trading and hedging. They are more suited for advisory investment banking. Most women say themselves they are too conscious or not scrupulous enough, and I believe that makes sense. There is a generical difference, which of course has long-term consequences. Well, to get back into the heart of the debate, I want to talk about risk. A slightly obvious business basic even a female political scientist like me understands, and we discussed this in the past days. The higher the risk, the higher is the potential outcome. Well, consequently, lower risks have lower expected returns. Also, coming from risk and to become an entrepreneur requires an important step in the middle, pitching the idea to an investor. So on the one hand side, we have the female entrepreneur who has an average 20 slides business plan for second, their product, for which they third, want money. On the other side, we have the investors. Those could be VCs, business angels, etc. They have money they want to increase by funding businesses for which they have second, third, and fixed expectations, beside a brief 7-slide pitch, of which most important is the person and the team, actually even more important than the idea. So women have to understand, they pitch primarily themselves, not their 7 to 20 slides business plans. But what is actually more interesting is that most women do not even take that step. Most women fear external investment. They do not pitch. Now, after stating some facts, I would like to come back to my interview, which actually turned into a discussion with the investment banker. My response to his simple biological reasoning was, at least from my opinion, more objective. Even assuming his argument is a relevant explanation for male-female differences, I deeply believe Simone de Beauvoir was right when she said, one is not born a woman, but becomes one. The gender, different from the biological sex of a person, is a social product. One is not raised a woman, but becomes one. One is raised to strive for harmony, communicate, and to be risk-averse. Well, the investment banker was not done with this argument yet. According to him, differences exist due to evolutionary reasons. Women, because they give birth, naturally carry the burden to take care for the family. Risking herself would risk a whole group of dependent others. But I was wondering, and maybe some of you could give me the answers, some men who are fathers, are you really more independent? Do you feel more independent? I think that nowadays men are not less dependent just because they don't give birth. Well, what I've found so far is women actually often are risk-averse, which indeed has a significant different impact on their economic performance. But I also believe the reasons for risk aversion might not simply be biological, but social. And they might be possible to cure. And I have evidence that risk aversion is not a female characteristic, but can also be male. So this is why I want to turn to my 3-step model, so introduced in the beginning, to overcome negative implications of so-called female natural risk aversion, which might change the economy and society in long term significantly, at least I hope so. Well, the first step is to recognize differences apart from stereotyping of each individual. What I mean is to not put people into boxes simply labeled male or female, but think bigger, think in more boxes. The second step is based on a statement of Christine Lagarde in 2010, it might also be 2009. If Lehman Brothers would have been Lehman Sisters, the financial crisis would have looked different. So you need, in the second step, you need to recognize that differences can be either positive or negative, depending on the situation you are in. So risk aversion, both in men and women, can be a useful skill at a specific point in the life cycle of a company, or even the economy as a whole. According to a CEO I interviewed, specific points in the life cycle of a company require different levels of risk-taking, especially during phases of restructuring. So if you want to come to a macro level, equally different economic and social situations might require more awareness and less risk-taking, such as in an economic crisis. Now I would like to come to my third step, take action. Appoint people according to their specific characteristics, and future challenges can be tackled effectively. Well, this might sound very easy. I mean, to wrap it up again, think in more than just 2 boxes, male but femaleness, think in more boxes, have different characteristics. One of those boxes can be called risk averse. And then in the second step, recognize that these boxes could be actually positive and useful. And in the third step, take action. It sounds easy, but it hasn't happened yet. Why? Will this model be successful? Hopefully. But nothing has ever been changed, either in society or economy, without trying. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Thank you very much to the 3 speakers. Very interesting essays. I hope you share with the jury the enthusiasm about these 3 essays. At this stage, I would like to open for questions from the audience to the 3 speakers. Can we have some light and a walking microphone that would then help a little bit? I'm sure that a lot of you have pressing issues, pressing questions that you would like to address to the audience.
Thank you very much. It was really inspiring. I'm Alessandra from Oxford University, and I'm from Switzerland, actually. This is a point that actually relates to something that I wanted already to express during the innovation debate that we had this morning. Somebody there mentioned when they started the speech about this whole innovation cycle that we have. So think about R&D, executing, and then raising capital for entrepreneurs. Very generally, and how different countries can be better in different stages. What I would like to say with that, it's what we should think about generally, is more how can we in each country, so for Europe especially, how can we make the whole process of entrepreneurship and innovation more equal on the different sides? And also, like, how can we connect science and business? Like, for me in Oxford, it wasn't difficult to find people with a technical background and, like, combine it with my finance background to fund a venture. But I think that more generally, more internationally, it is difficult to create communities where very good technology, very good science ideas can be connected. We talked about this in a previous session, and there were also some comments about this is a business opportunity in itself. How do we make this process more streamlined? I know in Silicon Valley how much easier it is to raise capital generally, and I know very good female entrepreneurs in there as well. So what I would say with this is more, rather than a question, is more a statement about what can we do to improve this process and therefore improve the competitiveness of Europe and emerging countries generally as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that comment/question, and I think I might actually address that to Jennifer. The question is basically how to make sure that all those great ideas that we have, all the good science that we have in Europe is being turned into something commerciable, into innovations.
Well, I think that Alessandra already mentioned some very valid points. What we need when we just look at entrepreneurship and diversity in entrepreneurship, we need more communities which work together. There are events which are organized by startups themselves or companies to bring together young entrepreneurs or hopefully future entrepreneurs to discuss future issues. But what I actually found very interesting was your point of raising funding for women. It's actually a very valid point, which, as I mentioned in my presentation, women often fear the risk of external investment because they fear that investors would first not take them serious enough, or if they take them serious, would demand too much from them, which they could not give, because many women believe that if they just want to start a startup, they would do it in a point of their life where they want to have kids and be more flexible, not work less, but be more flexible. And they expect that investors would not accept that. But that's actually not true, because most women I met who found a company work as many hours as a man does, but they have different ways of getting funding, and they often funded themselves because they were consultants before or had very well-paid jobs before, or they try to raise money from their friends, which is, in my opinion, one of the reasons why there are so little, is why there are so less female founders. And we actually need to encourage more women to go to investors and encourage investors to accept differences. But yeah, as you just mentioned, we need a new environment, and what we can do for this, I think, is a discussion more people should get involved with.
Very good. Thank you. Are there other questions, perhaps also to the other? Yes, there is a question behind. Just, yeah, over there.
My name is Patrick. I have a question for Mrs. Rodriguez. First, thank you for your presentation. I think it was emotionally very, very interesting. And listening to you was like watching a movie. So that was amazing. And so you mentioned that the poor have difficulty overcoming bribery and corruption when filling out forms, and you help them in that process. So I'm assuming the richer or better off people don't have that problem. Is that correct? And if so, then the task would be to teach those poor people, or why is that so? The task would be to teach them to learn how to do it so they don't have these problems.
Thank you for your question. The fact is, the richer people do not have any less corruption to deal with. To just put a set of figures before you, only about 3% of Indians have internet access, and there is a website which is opened up for Indians, wherein Indians are encouraged to log on and say if they have paid a bribe and how much of bribe they have paid. And obviously it's only the rich Indians who have access to this website. And they have got only about 11,000 responses so far, and the bribe figure is about 30 million rupees. So we are looking at a situation in which the rich have to pay as well. I do know that it is extremely difficult to go through life in India without paying a bribe. You have to make many more visits to the offices concerned and so on. But the point is, the amount that the rich are affected is much less than the amount that the poor are affected, because, for example, I can take the 5 days to go repeatedly to the office because I work in the formal sector where I have leave, and so I can go and maneuver the system. The poor cannot. The poor, if they don't go for a day's work, they are not given income and so on. So it is not a question of the rich being able to teach the poor how to maneuver the system. What we can do is go along with the poor so that we kind of take over the risk that they have. But I don't think it's possible, I don't think it's true that the rich have any less corruption to deal with.
Okay, thank you very much. There is a question over there. That gentleman. I'm sorry, I don't want to neglect your side. I will also come to your side afterwards.
Hi,
Yes,
my name is Carlos Jerez. I'm from Spain and I'm a student at Columbia University. My question goes as well for our colleague from India, and I really liked your speech. Congratulations, first of all. And my comment goes on, because I have experience working with an organization called Ashoka, which is a leader in social innovation, and one of their models, and it's called, they have a model called hybrid value. So it's a different approach to business, and basically it faces the challenge that traditional businesses have to deal with the bottom of the pyramid. So it's a model which includes both governments and the social sector in order to do business and to deal with the poor, in order to empower them both like on the educational side and providing them access to housing. So I think in that sense, trust is extremely important. But the picture that you showed was like sort of showing that the NGOs are mainly a source of corruption. So I just wanted to ask you, maybe if you have some figures on how, like what percentage of those NGOs acting in India are corrupt, because I personally believe that NGOs are a great tool in order to actually help people, because the communities, people from the communities can actually be trusted by the poor, rather than businesses or business people that can look like too external or too foreign to them. Thank you.
Very good.
Right. I think that a very valid source of information about how corrupt Indian NGOs can be is the common knowledge of people in the country. What do Indians feel about NGOs? And of course, if you are from India and have spent time there on a bus or a train or any public place, it is almost an open secret in India that most NGOs, not all, most NGOs are not very much trusted. And to formalize that a little more, the 2010 Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, for example, they asked the question, it's based on the perceptions of the citizens of the country, and they asked the question, to what extent do you perceive that NGOs are corrupt? And if you look at the scores that Indians gave, it was about 3.1 on 5, which is the 4th poorest in the world. So Indian NGOs are perceived as pretty corrupt by the people. And of course, you have various other surveys, like the Helpage India survey, another reputed survey, where 50% of NGO employees themselves accept that there are very unethical practices going on. In fact, you might know that many or most Indian women have to pay a certain amount of money to their groom's family before getting married. It's called dowry, and the greater dowry they pay, the better husband they get. Now, the interesting thing is that NGOs, in many cases, have been written in women's name, because NGOs are given as dowries these days because they are such a lucrative way of fund generation. And most NGOs, of course, are most corrupt NGOs are spearheaded by politicians and bureaucrats, but even the little honesty that exists in the system sees hundreds of NGOs thrown off the list each year from both central and state governments. And you have numerous federal investigations as well as criminal cases filed against Indian NGOs. So the extent of corruption is extremely high.
But very good point. But as you raised actually the question of generalizability, and I think as social scientists and as kind of young students and so on, we always have to think about to what extent can we generalize from cases. This is actually academic rigor, and your question is very pertinent, and it's also something that we have to take with us as we look at this particular case. Let me then go to this side, and I think we have time for one more question. I hope you will actually address it to our third speaker here. Yes, please.
Yes, exactly. Daniel, aging Swiss diplomat. Ms. Petrovic, when I was a young Swiss diplomat, my very first appointment was in Belgrade, in the old Yugoslavia, Dobrovic. What went wrong? It was the worst conflict by a far shot in Europe since the Second World War. It was much worse than the big public realized. Even we here in Switzerland, and when the conflict was really on, I happened to be in a position to coordinate the Swiss policy towards ex-Yugoslavia. Ex-Yugoslavia fell apart very, very quickly. And a lot of people died, Yugoslavs, but also others. It took people like Richard Holbrooke and NATO to bring at least a semblance of civilization back to the Balkans. What went wrong? Should we have been, you of course say it begins with the individual person, and I would totally agree on that. But what did the governments do wrong? Did we not realize that this can happen in Rwanda, but it can also happen and it did happen in ex-Yugoslavia? Should we have been even tougher? Should Milosevic have been taken out early on, you know, with a special force or something? Should we now still be much tougher on any kind of even remotely nationalist paroles within political party. And of course, I'm not only talking of Serbia, I'm talking of Croatia, etc. What went wrong on that? Because for a whole generation, and I can fairly say of European diplomats that dealt with the question, it was clearly a total letdown. It was Helsinki was an up, and then as soon as that was successfully done and Europe was united, all comes crashing down, and we saw concentration camps again. We tend to forget now, but it was horrible. But what went wrong in your perspective?
Thank you very much for this. This is really a great question, and the one that it is very rarely asked. What went wrong is that, well, actually it all started with the end of the Second World War. The international community took the wrong approach by allowing Tito not to follow the logic of justice, but to follow the logic of peace, neglecting the justice. So the many victims of the Second World War were completely neglected. They were sidelined, and people were actually forbidden to talk about them. That's one of the reasons why only 6 months ago there has been an international commission assigned to come up with the final number of, for example, victims of Jasenovac concentration camp, which is above, so far they came up with above 70,000 Serbs, 26,000 Roma, and I think about 17,000 Jews who lived in Yugoslavia. And again, I would disagree that you were not tough enough. I would say that you were selectively tough. And that, again, there was a lack of balance in addressing justice. It was how justice was perceived and not what justice was. And imposed solutions were never famous for lasting long. So I hope that at least partially I answer some of your questions. I do not think that you can hope for a long-lasting peace if you impose a solution without consulting the people in the ground. And yes, I sincerely do believe that all of the dictators of the Western Balkans of the 90s should have been removed far, far before everything happened.
Okay. Thank you very much.